If you're training for your first marathon or you're looking to set a new personal best in your next marathon, this video is going to be for you. Before running my first marathon, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I hired an elite runner as my coach. I followed the training plan, I put in the work, and I started to learn what it actually takes to prepare for the marathon distance. I'm going to share with you what I've changed going into my second marathon. From tweaks that I made to my training, the type and amount of mileage that I'm doing, how I'm feeling during runs and before runs, my mindset, and my just overall approach to give myself the best chance to enjoy and run my fastest time in November when I run the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon. So in 2025, I ran the Wineglass Marathon in Corning, New York, and I ran that in a finishing time of 3 hours and 56 minutes and I think 50 seconds. Going into that race, I thought that I had done everything right. I was following the training plan, I was hitting my paces, and I felt good. Early in the year, I finished my first half road race and I hit my goal. So everything seemed to be lining up that I was going to have a great first marathon. But the marathon that day taught me that you don't know the marathon until you experience it. My coach said that I was in 3:30 to 3:45 shape, but I ended up running about a minute a mile slower in the race. So what happened? Some things were out of my control. I was dealing with the grief of losing my dog early in the training block, and that certainly weighed on me. Other things were things that you just have to take account for, like the weather being 50 degrees and then by the time you finish, it's in the high 70s. And that's where these changes come into play, because there are things that you can change in your training to make sure that you do have a successful marathon, regardless of what that looks like. And I'm going to discuss that now for what I've shifted going into marathon block number 2. By far the biggest training change that I made was upping my mileage. In 2025 alone, I averaged about 40 miles per week. And during my marathon block, I averaged about 42 miles a week with a peak of 56 miles. And in comparison, in 2026 so far, being in June, I've averaged about 55 miles per week for the entire year, and I'm already up to 60 miles per week, and I haven't even started my marathon block. And this was something that I put into practice and tried in my last half marathon that I did earlier in the year. It was the same course that I ran the year before, so it was a nice, easy test for me to be able to see, is this actually going to work? And it did. I went from a 150 half marathon in 2025, and on the same course a year later, I ran a 139. The biggest difference that I noticed in doing this was I was able to hold my race pace for a lot longer with a lot less effort. And so I was going into mile 10 feeling like I was ready to put the foot down, versus last year when I got to mile 10, I was struggling. But increasing mileage doesn't mean that every run needs to be harder. And this is where I did things a little differently. What I found that works specifically best for me is I plan for about 15% of miles being hard. This gives me enough room that if I have miles that creep over from easy miles into hard miles, I have a nice buffer so that I don't overtrain and I'm still ready to go in the next session without having to take a rest day. This is what's helped me not overtrain in the past year, and I've only had to have one rest day a week running 6 days a week. Most weeks I end up doing about 18 to 20% hard miles by doing it this way. And the balance of doing more easy mileage while I'm upping my miles really helps me be able to stay consistent and not pick up any injuries. The next big change that I made was fueling, and it's not just taking gels. One thing that I've done consistently, which my first coach really implored, was making sure that I eat something before every run. So now I tailor it to how much time I have before my run actually begins, because working a traditional full-time job, sometimes we have to sneak in runs whenever we can fit them. So what I do is some days where I have to run sooner than I would like, I'll only have about half of a bagel. And days where I know that I have an hour or two to sit before I'm running, I'll have a full bagel to really get my energy levels to where I want them to be and not sacrifice feeling sluggish during the run. And during runs, I've changed a little bit. So before, I usually wouldn't bring any fuel with me. My usual runs during the week are about 7 to 8 miles for my easy day. So what I'll do is I'll take one beta fuel gel with me and I'll take that about halfway. And this gives me two things. It helps me train my gut to the gel on an easier pace so that it can slowly get more and more used to it. And also, it just helps me be completely stored up so that I can get the most out of that easy run. And the last thing for fueling is I've become more intentional with what I do after I run. So some long runs, I'm just not hungry. And what I'll do is before the run, I'll make a protein shake with 2 scoops so that I have a little bit extra. And what I'll do is by the time that my run is over, I'll try and get it down maybe in the first 30 minutes, but if not, not, I'll allow myself to relax. I'll take the pressure off myself. And if it takes me an hour or two to then finally eat something, so be it. Because in my eyes, it's better to eat something 2 hours out than to have not eaten anything at all. It's probably not the most recommended way, but it's better than nothing. And the point here is don't be too hard on yourself. Try and get it in, but if there are days where you're just not hungry, then try and figure out creative ways that you can try and get something in your stomach, because your recovery will significantly see a difference the more you can do this routinely. Another thing that I changed, and this may seem small, but it's had a big impact, is being more mindful of how I feel during a run and what my heart rate is actually reflecting. One thing that's been a focal point for me in 2026 is making sure that I hit my efforts on target and making sure that I'm doing that consistently. One thing that I've tried to employ is how I feel, is it matching up with what my heart rate is saying, so that I have more than one data point to make sure that I'm in the right feel that I'm supposed to be for each effort. And how I've done this is my recovery ones should be a 1 out of 10. My easy run should be a 2, 3, or 4, depending on the distance. And then I'll have my tempos as, say, a 5 or 6 effort. And then anything above that, it'll gauge between what paces I'm looking for, with my all out trying to keep at just a 9 so that I know that I'm not overdoing it and exerting myself. And this has helped me be able to be more consistent, because there are so many different algorithms for what your heart rate should look like and how it looks like. And to be honest, I just don't have a place near me where I can actually do a real test in a lab to find out what my zones actually are. So a way that I combat this is I use the Corvean method to figure out what my heart rate ranges are. So if I feel like it's easy, then I'll check my heart rate to see, okay, this is matching up with how I feel. Perfect. I'll keep at this. But depending on what the factors are outside, that is going to fluctuate, because if it's a hotter day, your legs may feel like you're running easy, but your heart rate may be a zone higher. So you really have to just trust your gut and trust how you feel and kind of split the difference. And I've also changed how I use my treadmill. I use it as the tool that it is now. I used to feel like using the treadmill was cheating myself. I mean, everyone talks about it being a treadmill and it being not as good a fitness check as running outside. But there are days and moments where your treadmill really can be the most effective tool that you can use. Living in upstate New York, our weather fluctuates pretty frequently. I mean, the weather is just pretty out of control. So one thing that I've changed from last summer, where I was trying to run 15-mile to 20-mile runs out in 85, 90-degree weather, this year I'm using my treadmill for those, because that's just too much extra fatigue that is going to set me up for having to take an extra rest day versus continue on with my plan and not have extra fatigue that I don't need. Because throughout a marathon block, you are going to accumulate fatigue. It's a part of the training. But if you can minimize some of those external factors that are going to be adding on more fatigue, then it's going to help your training be more consistent and less injury than if you were to not use it. And looking back, trying to run 15 to 20 miles in 85 to 90-degree weather just wasn't smart. I thought I was being brave, and in actuality, I was really hurting what my fitness could have been, because I was having to go significantly slower and walk on some of those runs, where if I was on a treadmill, I would be cruising. And that brings me to the point that during training, I was just accumulating too much fatigue that was unnecessary fatigue. Training for my first marathon and going over 50 miles per week for the first time last year in my entire life was a learning experience. And now I don't look at the treadmill as something that holds me back. I look at it as something that I can utilize to help myself get faster and stay more consistent. And funny enough, in the training blocks for my half marathon where I've utilized the treadmill more, I've ran significantly faster during those races. So after my first marathon, I had things that I liked and disliked about having a coach. Nothing specific about the coach in general. She was great, but there was a lot of things to training where you're training yourself versus another person that I just wasn't sure if it was for me. There's just aspects to having a coach that aren't as fluid as coaching yourself. I mean, if you truly wanted to, you can change your plan around. You don't have to adjust it with anybody. You can take a rest day whenever you feel like, and there's no one to hold you accountable. But that was also the negative. I want accountability. I want to make sure that I'm following a plan that is designed to actually help me get faster and not one that I'm guessing at. And that's where a couple months ago, I had an opportunity presented itself and I took it. Now I have a new coach, somebody that definitely knows a lot more about running than I do. I signed up with Let's Tango Running because the dream dream is still to qualify for Boston, and having an Olympian in your corner, there's really no excuses. This time around, I'm doing things a little differently. I'm being more open with my coach about how I feel, what's going on in my life, and I'm making sure to ask more clarifying questions if I'm not 100% certain about something. Now, this may lead to me being a little bit more annoying than I even hope to be, but with so much on the internet and so much advice out there, I'd rather my coach tell me that it's right or wrong, or give me a detail about how to change it, than to be doing it wrong the entire time and then have to fix months and months of mistakes. And honestly, my coach has been fantastic about it. Anytime I have a question, he's very quick to respond, and he provides a thorough response so I know where to go moving forward. And as somebody who's not an elite runner, that's extremely helpful. So if you're looking to sign up with your first ever coach or try a new one, then I would suggest you go to my coach's website, letstango.run, and check out their coaches and book a meeting, because having the right coach truly can make the world a difference and can also help you really enjoy and love running. So in case you're interested in signing up with a coach, I'll leave the link right here for letstango.run and in the description below in case you are curious about coaching and want to check it out further. Probably the biggest mental change that I've made is how I approach goals and when I set them. So before, I used to think of this dream time that I wanted and then try and build a plan around that. But in reality, your body just may not be there, or you might be selling yourself short. So here's what I've been doing different. I go through my whole training block and I go based off effort for hard days and for easy days, so that I'm hitting the right intensity that is meant for that workout. Once the training block is closer to being over and I'm a few weeks out from my race, I'll then analyze the data with my coach to see where my fitness actually is sitting at, so that we can get a good idea of what race time and what race pace I should be aiming for as my A goal, and where my fitness truly is. The big reason for this is that if you set your goal time too fast, you might find yourself overtraining very quickly and you're not able to recover. Or you set your goal too modest and there's a lot of time left on the table and you get to the finish line wondering, what if? So if you're using things like Garmin to project what your race time could be and going off that, here's why that's wrong. My last half marathon, I input the course data like I do for all my races, and it projected that I was going to run a 1:48. I ended up running a 1:39. Quite a significant difference. And for my Indianapolis Marathon right now, it has me projected as a 3:35. So I wouldn't put too much stock in what the projections are unless you have a really long training history with Garmin, and I would say over years, where your fitness hasn't changed much. If you're new to the channel, thanks for watching all the way to the end. I will be having updates throughout my training. I'm going to be documenting the entire journey, making sure that I provide you guys with videos of races that I do, as well as training updates and tips that can be helpful regardless of whatever level runner you are. So if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.